All right, this is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. This is our 23rd mobility space. We're talking about what I call the slow death of true visa-free travel and the rise of what I call visa light. And of course, I'm going to explain those terms and what I mean by that. As a reminder, this is part of our Mobility Spaces series. We're doing 50 mobility spaces on the most important topics in dual citizenship, passports, freedom of movement. We're doing one every Monday and every Thursday, typically at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So all are welcome to join and all are welcome to speak. All you have to do is send a request and I'll approve it right away. You don't have to wait to be invited. You can jump right in. Okay, so what do we got here? So um, here's the thing. We're seeing a shift right now in the mobility space vis-a-vis visa-free travel. Okay, so up until now, if you're from a country like the United States, Canada, typical Western countries, or I should say up until recently, visa-free travel would mean that if you want to go to a foreign country that offers visa-free access to citizens of your country, you buy a ticket, get on the plane, and show up and present yourself with a passport. That's what visa-free travel, visa-free access has typically meant until fairly recently, right? That seems to be coming to an end, okay? And instead, what we're seeing is a lot of countries that offer visa-free access to nationals of other countries are requiring types of electronic travel authorizations, ETAs, okay, before a citizen goes there. Okay, citizen of a foreign country, right? What's an electronic travel authorization? Well, obviously, what it is exactly varies from country to country, but typically the profile is if you're a citizen of a country, let's say the United States, okay, and your country has citizens of your country have visa-free access to another country. Typically, you go online, you answer some questions. We typically see them kind of in the, let's call it 8 question to 20 question range. Electronically submit it, and then get an answer within a few minutes, all the way until maybe 2, 3 days later, okay, giving you approval basically to board the flight and to enter that other country visa free. That's an ETA, okay, and these have different names. Okay, United States, of course, has this as well. We call it ESTA, okay, although not every country has visa-free access to the United States visa ESTA, but the majority of ones who have visa-free access to the United States have it through the visa waiver program, which is ESTA, that was implemented in 2009. The United Kingdom has an ETA, okay, which Americans are subject to as of this year. The Japan is currently implementing JESTA, okay, Japanese Electronic Authorization Program, which is scheduled to be implemented for Americans or required for Americans in 2028. And then, of course, the European Union has been trying to implement ETIAS, okay, an electronic travel authorization for non-Europeans. And the EU has been pushing it back year after year. I believe the most recent projection is that the ETIAS is expected to go live for Americans and other non-Europeans at the end of 2026. And then, of course, Australia. Australia has an ETA as well. That's not all the countries. There are other countries that have these ETAs. But the point is, this is kind of a transformation that we're seeing here. Okay, whereas previously, what was true visa-free access is shifting to this system of ETAs, electronic travel authorizations. Now, what are these? Are these visas? I call these visa light. I call visa light. Okay, what do I define as visa light? An electronic application that's short, that's not too expensive. Okay, so not more than $30, $40, and critically doesn't require an interview. Okay, especially in person. I think that last part is critical, okay, because being an immigration lawyer, you see an interview can really be problematic, okay, especially for people who want to do quick travel, okay. Why? Because obviously when you have an interview, it takes time. It takes time with the consular official. You have to get into a calendar. Sometimes consulates are booked up, they're backed up for weeks, months, even years sometimes, okay. So as soon as an interview starts being implemented for some sort of authorization to travel to another country, that's a bad sign for individual freedom of movement, okay? Because even if the interviews are available right away, over a long enough timeline, it's just a matter of time until inevitably the consulate that has jurisdiction for an application like yours is going to have a backlog, okay, and you're going to be caught up, okay. So what I call these ETAs visa light, okay. I still think they fall within the spirit of a visa, okay. So I've written before, and I'll say it again. To me, nomenclature aside, if you have to apply for something and be approved for that thing, and you can be denied for that thing, okay, and you have to do this all before you board a flight to travel to the destination, to me, that's a visa. That's in the spirit of a visa, okay. Now, obviously, I call this visa light. There are visas that are way more onerous to apply for. There are visas that are way less onerous to apply for. It's obviously a spectrum as far as cost and effort. But to me, visa light is a visa, okay. So therefore, I believe on the world, on the world level, we are transitioning. We're basically seeing what I consider the slow death of true visa-free travel. Okay, true visa-free travel. What we've known as Americans, what Americans have been spoiled with, okay, for years, if not decades, which is, like I said, book a flight, have your passport, show up, and be let in by CBP. Okay, that's what I call visa-free, true visa-free access. I think it's dying out. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean that the world is shifting to ETAs, to visa light, right? Well, I think the first step would be to look at what are some of the typical questions that are asked, okay, of these ETAs. Now, typically, the profile that we see is a bunch of personal identifying information, right, in an online ETA application. So, name, date of birth, place of birth, passport numbers, those sorts of things. Second category we see is typically information about previous immigration violations. Okay, so questions about whether you've ever previously violated the immigration laws of the country that you're applying for an ETA for. Okay, have you ever been denied access? Okay, I think that's going to be expanded in the future to include previous immigration violations from other countries. Okay, so if you're applying, for example, for an ETA in country X, I think we're going to see more often that country X is going to ask, not only have you ever broken our immigration laws previously, have you ever been subject to an order of removal or overstayed a visa in any country in the world? Okay, I think that's inevitable that we're going to see those, blanket expansion of those questions about previous immigration violations. And that's going to have obviously more effects, more implications for people that have had previous immigration violations in other countries. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the space. Okay, but second category, previous immigration violations. Third category that we typically see as a profile is criminal history. Okay, so some ETAs ask if you've ever been convicted of a crime, and they define the type of crime that they want to know about. Okay, so for example, with a max sentence of longer than 12 months, a felony, a misdemeanor, etc. And then some ETAs ask a much more broader question: have you ever been, convicted of any crime? Okay, or if you've ever been arrested. Okay, please put that in there. So that's a third category. Fourth category that we sometimes see is communicable diseases, right? So, obviously the United States and plenty of other countries have grounds of inadmissibility based off of communicable diseases, okay? Meaning that if a person has certain diseases, they could be deemed inadmissible to that country, meaning that they cannot enter typically. A fifth category that we see is information about social media accounts. Okay, social media accounts. That's obviously been in the news, especially with U.S. immigration recently. The United States has asked for some time, okay, for immigrant visa applications for the applicants to disclose their social media accounts. But the social media account issue has been more in the news since Trump was elected because the Trump admin has been a lot more aggressive about seeking out information about visa applicants' social media presence and denying them based on that, right? Another category is travel to certain countries. Okay, this is a big one. This is a big one, and this is a category that we're seeing being used as a cudgel to punish people who travel. So visa applicants who have traveled to countries that are deemed, naughty countries, bad countries, war zones, countries that are considered, state sponsors of terror. Okay, so that's another category that we see, and then I guess I would consider the seventh category just generally broad questions about membership in terrorist organizations and support for terrorist organizations? And I find that second question to be a lot more sensitive. Why? Because everybody, not everybody, but we have much more of a voice online right now. Okay. So if you voice support for a certain side in some sort of geopolitical dispute, right? Well, some sides are considered terrorist groups and terrorist organizations, okay, by countries. Okay. So if you're online commenting about the Israeli Palestinian issue and you're mentioning support for Palestinian, is it Palestine or Palestinians? Is it that much more of a stretch for a country to accuse you of supporting, a terrorist group, if Hamas is the elected representative of Gaza? I don't think it's that much of a stretch at all. And in fact, we've already seen some countries, notably the United States, kind of equate in certain contexts support for Palestine, support for Palestinian autonomy with support for terrorism. Okay. So these are the seven, I think, the seven kind of big categories of questions that we see being asked in electronic travel authorizations. And obviously this type of information that's being asked means different things for different applicants, right? Every applicant has their own little profile, right? Some people like adventure travel, okay? They're going to be more susceptible, more vulnerable to questions asking about travel to, so-called terrorist countries or war zones. Some people had a slip up when they were a kid, okay, so they got a D, or okay, maybe not a kid, okay, but maybe if you're 21, 22 years old, a young man, and you had a slip up and you were arrested for DUI and you were convicted, okay, estimated 60 million plus Americans have at least a misdemeanor or a felony conviction. It's not that uncommon, okay, it's not just hardened criminals that have convictions. So that person is going to be more susceptible, more vulnerable, obviously, to ETA questions that ask about previous criminal violations, right? So these things, the rise of the ETAs, okay, and the rise of the enforcement and the exclusion of people based off of those questions, which is lagging, okay. We're seeing a rise of ETAs, but lagging behind that, besides, I would say, accepting the United States example with ESTA, but except the United States, the exclusion, strong, heavy exclusion of people based off of ETA questions, that's lagging a little bit behind, in my opinion, and that's natural, right? Obviously, first countries have to basically implement the it's called apparatus to demand answers to these questions. And then later on, they start ramping up typically, their enforcement and exclusion based off of answers. And obviously, a lot of that is subject to, the political feelings in the country, right? But these have different pressure points for different people moving forward, okay, individually based off of their profiles. And in addition to personal profiles, in my opinion, the rise of these ETAs have general effects, general overarching effects on the values, the comparative values of other mobility assets, let's call them. Okay. And by mobility assets, I mean anything that allows you access to another country. So I consider under the umbrella of mobility assets to be visas, residencies, citizenships, what I call semi-citizenships. Okay. The rise of ETAs and the death of what I call true visa-free access shifts the balance, okay, of the values of different mobility assets, okay, in my opinion. And of course, be happy to hear what other people think here if they have any other opinions on this as well. How do they shift it? Okay, well, the first one is the obvious one. Okay, visa-free access as a benefit of citizenship becomes more fragile. It's more fragile. Okay, if previously you could just show up, like I said, without any type of previous authorization, and just by virtue of you being citizen of a country, having a passport issued by that country, you could gain access to the country. And if now you can't, well, that benefit of citizenship, visa-free access, is more fragile. Obviously, across the board. Okay, it's more fragile. Okay. A second effect on the value of other mobility assets is that comparatively, it increases the value of immediate highest right of entry that a person has by being citizen of a country. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean the super visa, tourist visa, the super tourist visa that's nested within every citizenship. Every citizenship has nested within it a super tourist visa, immediate highest right of entry to that country. Okay, so if you're a citizen of a country and you're not resident there, but you just want to visit, okay, you obviously don't apply for a visa. You automatically have immediate highest right of access to that country as a citizen, even if you're traveling there, right? Not as a resident, but just as a tourist, as a visitor, okay. In that sense, your super tourist visa is nested within your citizenship. Okay, why is it the super tourist visa? Okay, because it has the immediate highest right of entry. You don't have to apply for it. It has no expiration period. Okay, and it's difficult, if not impossible, in some instances to be revoked. That's why I call it the super tourist visa that's nested within it, within a citizenship. So the value of that goes up comparatively, right? If people can now be much more easily denied based off of ETAs. Okay. Number three effect that this shift has on other mobility assets: citizenship in a visa-free bloc or a borderless bloc becomes comparatively more valuable. Okay, we're talking about Schengen zone, obviously. Okay, so if you have citizenship in a country that's part of the Schengen zone, okay, if you have immediate highest right of access to that country as citizen, okay, and then there's no controlled borders, okay, between that country of your citizenship and other countries within Schengen, okay, well, obviously the value of that citizenship, okay, in securing your access, your visa-free access to not just your own country, like I said in the previous category, but all the other countries in that borderless zone goes up comparatively, okay, because obviously you're not subject to an additional vulnerability that people are going to have when they're applying for ETAs in order to gain access. Okay. Number four, residencies become more valuable. Why? Well, residencies, they're temporary or permanent. Of course, they still have grounds, typically for revocability. They still can have periods of expiration, especially temporary residencies, right? But even permanent residencies, so-called permanent, and I'm doing permanent in air quotes because I think that's a misnomer, right? If a permanent residency actually has an expiration date, well, it's not permanent, okay, by the common use of the word. But even those, of course, still have expirations, okay. But typically, every time when you're entering a country that you have some sort of residency in, you're not typically having to go through the rigmarole of subjecting yourself to applying for an electronic travel authorization in order to travel through that country, right? So that's the fourth category. I would say the value of those things, residencies, goes up comparatively. And then I would also say, actually, number five, what I call full tourist visas become more valuable. Full tourist visa, okay, that's what I mentioned at the beginning. Okay, you apply for a visa for a country tourist visa, typically requires an application, an interview, okay, and then you get a visa for lengthy period of time, a length of period, so 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. These are common validity periods. You don't have to go through the hassle of applying for an ETA each time that you go in. Okay, if you have the full tourist visa, so I say the value of that thing goes up. Okay, um, I'm gonna take a pause now. I've been going for about 19, 20 minutes now. We got David here. David, I'm gonna invite you to speak. You don't have to speak, but I'm just gonna queue you up. And we got Alex Ogorji here. Okay. Um, Anybody have any comments or questions before I go on here? Anybody want to jump in, or should I just keep steaming on?
I wonder if countries are going to start pushing back for their citizens to get better entry rights than the traditional travel authorization ones. I know in the past there's been some examples of countries saying that you must treat all of our citizens equally. For example, if there's citizens that are dual citizens with a country that's on a ban list or otherwise controversial, there's been some pushback from countries like US and others to allow all citizens in. I wonder if something similar might be done in the ETA context where the US says you got to let in all of our citizens, or in the case of Trump, or we tariff you.
I don't think it's going to happen, Alex. And I know what you mean. Before Israel joined the visa waiver program, there was disputes about Israel. I don't know if this is the example you're thinking about, but this is the example that came to my mind. Israel was denying access to Israel of Palestinian Americans, even though Americans were supposed to have visa-free access. That was an issue that had to be ironed out before Israel joined the visa waiver program. So I would say that was an example of what you said, which is the United States pushing for access of all their citizens, irrespective of what other citizenship they may have. I don't think we're going to see, though, what you said, Alex. Basically, Americans, America or other countries. I don't think we're going to see it in mass. Maybe here and there it'll happen. I don't think we're going to see countries say, "Hey, forget your electronic travel authorization. We want our citizens to be able to visit your country without filling out a form." Why? Because countries want more control, and I don't think most countries really give a hoot if their citizens have to jump through additional hoops to enter other countries, as long as countries are able to exercise the control they want, okay, for other foreigners entering their country. And I don't think countries implementing their own ETAs are going to say, be willing to have some sort of reciprocal rollback of ETAs where they say, okay, we'll stop our ETA for your citizens if you stop your ETA for our citizens. I would like that to be the case, but color me skeptical. I don't believe countries.
What about the denial of key figures in the U.S., say Marjorie Taylor Greene or something like that? I could see her getting denied entry and then making it into an issue
Yeah, on a one.
where they're denying.
Yeah, on one-off basis, especially if they're politicians. Yeah, I could see a diplomatic kerfluffle that leads to United States or one country pressuring another country to let the person in. Yeah, I agree. I think so for one-offs, but not on a mass scale, in my opinion.
Doesn't this run the risk of making the passport ranking industry obsolete?
I think the ship has sailed on that, David. Just 99% of the public doesn't know it yet. Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this at length, David. You've been part of those conversations. Visa-free access, even when it was true visa-free access, is not the most important, not the most valuable benefit of citizenship. It's absurd to rank citizenship based off of that, which is what passport rankings do under the misnomer of ranking passports, even though, as we know, that's a benefit of citizenship, not of passports. But yeah, of course, I mean, this further reduces the importance, in my opinion, or the value of visa-free access to third-party countries of a citizenship, the value of that benefit of the citizenship. So yeah, of course, in my opinion, it further this development, this shift further decreases that value of.
Well, it may mean that industry will have to find new ways to evaluate passports, that citizenships rather, in more useful ways, as we've discussed in the past.
Yeah, if they're capable, that requires reading law.
Yep.
See, David, as you know, the visa-free, not all rankings, but the bulk of the visa-free passport rankings, it was just co-option of a list of the IATA. Okay, so I think it's the International Air Transit something or other. They just took the list, okay, from this third-party industry website organization, which basically, indicated which citizens of which country could travel visa free to citizens or to which countries. And they just slapped branding on it and basically started calling that a passport rankings list. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. I mean, it's just requires no skill, little skill or no skill. Really evaluating citizenships is really difficult and messy. It's not just difficult, it's messy. It's hard to measure. I mean, it's in large part subjective, right? As we've spoken about before, some benefits of citizenships matter a lot more to certain people than others. And look, I'll play devil's advocate. There's some people out there. I've had clients who are at the height of their earning years, okay, entrepreneurs, and traveling visa free to be able to visit partners, manufacturers is extremely important for them. Okay, even if that benefit were to be taken away from them or diminished in 5-10 years, for somebody with that profile, paying $260,000 or $70,000 for a Caribbean citizenship by investment that has visa-free access, even if that visa-free access is under threat, okay, by the EU, is valuable. It's worth it, right? But obviously that's one profile. So yeah, I totally You're preaching to the choir here, David. I agree with you, of course. Okay, so this is in my opinion, like I said, I think this shift has those five effects on the value of other mobility assets. Okay, and then also, as I mentioned, as I kind of alluded to before, this shift has differing effects on different people with different profiles. Okay, if you've had a previous criminal violation, okay, you're going to be vulnerable to being denied an electronic travel authorization. And I don't think the reality of this has hit yet, especially for Americans who have been spoiled. Okay. ETIAS, in order for Americans to be able to gain access to Europe visa free, has not been implemented yet. Okay. It's supposed to be implemented by the end of 2026. They have within their questions, okay, questions about previous criminal history. Okay. Um, as far as my research shows, as far as what I've read, there's no plans to immediately exclude people based off of that criminal history, but it's just a matter of time. Okay, it's just a matter of time for those people to be excluded. Okay, and the way these things typically go is if a form solicits certain information, and if some of that information is really derogatory, eventually people start being excluded. The worst of the worst start being excluded. Okay, hey, an American is applying for ETIAS in 2029, let's say, okay, 3 years after ETIAS is hypothetically implemented. And they reveal, it's a 70-year-old man, okay, the guy has been convicted of murder, okay, and he served a sentence for murder. He came in and he's denied, okay. Is anybody going to object to that? Is anybody going to object and say, hey, we don't want murders? Sorry, we excluded a murderer, okay, a rapist. We excluded somebody who, went to prison for robbery, okay, for violent crime, okay, for white collar crime. I don't think that many people are going to lose much sleep over that, okay. That's how these things work, okay. Typically, people are excluded based off of, being, the worst of the worst or perceived as being the worst of the worst. And once that precedent is set of that exclusion based off of that grounds, obviously becomes much more easy to just start excluding people based off of policy. Then it's all, hey, we don't want irresponsible drivers. We don't want drunk drivers. Okay, DUI is super common in the United States. Okay, Canada already excludes a lot of Americans for having DUIs. Okay, that's, in my opinion, I don't know if that's going to necessarily happen, like, for example, Americans being excluded from Europe based off of DUI in the future, but a move towards that direction is inevitable. Okay, first, people with really bad perceived criminal records are going to be excluded. Then eventually it's just going to become policy. Okay, but that's just convictions. I don't think that's where it's going to end. I think eventually we're going to get into speech-based exclusions. Okay. And when I say eventually get into speech-based exclusions, I'm talking about Europe denying Americans. We're already denying in the United States people based off of speech. Okay, Trump has done this. Trump, there's super famous, examples, not just of people trying to gain access to the United States visa-free or with a tourist visa, but even students. Okay, exchange students here. Okay, even the Trump admin tried this with a legal LPR, a legal permanent resident. Okay, basically trying to revoke status based off of speech, claim that they're a threat to national security. Okay, in this instance, it was because of advocacy for Palestinian issues, and deport the people. Okay, so the upshot is, okay, countries obviously can deny people based off of what they want. Countries are autonomous; they have their sovereign immigration rules. But the upshot is, and the point that I'm trying to make here is, previous to this visa light, to the rise of electronic travel authorizations, this information wasn't even solicited at all. It's very difficult to discriminate or to against somebody or to deny somebody or exclude somebody based off of a distinction that you're not even aware of. Okay, and that's the way it was previously. Okay, the information wasn't solicited at all. Now it's starting to be solicited, and it's going to continue to be solicited. Some countries can just hold that information and lag, like I said, on implementing, a robust, exclusion mechanism for people that give answers that the country doesn't like. But some countries are going to move more aggressively, okay, to basically deny entry based off of speech, previous travel history, criminal records, etc. Right? So this is the direction that we are headed, okay, in the world. And what does it mean? people who listen to these spaces, people who participate are typically people who are into freedom of movement, sovereignty, multiple citizenship, being able to move, freedom generally, let's call it. Okay. So what does it mean for the freedom seeker? Okay. The person who wants to obviously be able to have his max freedom of movement on an individual level. Okay. Well, to me, it further strengthens the need, okay, to have a second and third citizenship, of course, okay, because let's say all cooperation between governments goes to hell, okay, as far as even visa-free blocks, okay, uncontrolled borders within blocks like the Schengen zone, or let's go the common travel area, okay, the UK, Ireland, etc. If you have hypothetically 190 citizenships, okay, and you have no visa-free access to any country, well, as I mentioned before, nested within each one of those 190 citizenships is a robust, a super tourist visa to those 190 countries. Okay, now obviously nobody's going to go out and get 190 citizenships, but I take an extreme example to illustrate the principle. Okay, if you absolutely have to have access, you absolutely want to have access to 3 or 4 countries. These are the countries you absolutely love. Your family's based there. They're your favorite places. Your business is there, and you need to, for some reason, have access, there. You want to retire there. Okay. In my opinion, if you're planning for the long term, you're thinking more about the possibility of picking up that citizenship somehow. Okay. Or as a secondary level, picking up what I call satellite residency rights there. Okay, satellite residency rights are residency rights that you get in a third country by virtue of citizenship in a second country. Okay, so you're an American, you become citizen in France, you pick up core residency rights in France, immediate highest right of entry and residence in France, and satellite residency rights in Hungary, satellite residency rights in Spain, etc., etc. Okay. So that's the first thing that I think about. Okay, when I think about this shift, okay, to ETAs, it increases the value of and reliance on the immediate highest right of entry that you get with a citizenship, the super tourist visa within a citizenship. What do you think about that, Alex? Throw out a question. Let's get some other people in here talking.
But what specifically?
What do you think the shift from true visa free to visa light does to the aspect of citizenship? So the benefit of citizenship, that is the immediate highest right of entry and residency in the country.
Well, I think people need to change their approach. So if you're someone who values free speech and likes to speak their mind on controversial topics publicly, then you probably need to start collecting some residencies and ideally citizenships as well. Because, like you said, US is already doing it, EU is already doing it, and so best to have entry rights to the world's biggest economy and the most popular tourism economy if possible. Seems like it might be useful for most people over the course of their life to be able to access those places, and it's only going to become more and more difficult to do so. So best to acquire residencies or citizenships that assist with that sooner rather than later. It may also make people just shift their behavior. Maybe it's easier to just stop expressing your opinions publicly than to acquire better residency rights or citizenships, which I think is kind of the goal in the US context, is to have a chilling effect. And so that could be one solution, is to embrace the chilling effect and say, well, I'd rather have access than be able to publicly speak my mind. And an additional consideration is for people to think, if they only could have access to a handful of countries, which countries would those be? And figure out how they can get the highest level of entry rights to those countries sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So your answer kind of centered on one of the attack vectors, which is speech, as a ground for exclusion to visa-free access to these other countries that are requiring ETAs. Yeah, like I said, we're already seeing that from the American context. I think we're going to see that increasingly going forward, right? We saw it, Candace Owens, I believe, who's obviously extremely controversial. She was denied entry to Australia on a speaking tour. I believe her ETA was declined, was denied, okay, to travel to Australia a year or two ago, okay? Imagine if you're Andrew Tate, okay? One of these, just to take an extreme example, one of these extremely controversial figures, okay, if you have to fill out an ETA in order to gain access, right, you're obviously much more at risk of being denied ahead of time based on that ETA. Now, could somebody like Andrew Tate or Candace Owens, in the context of true visa-free access, so no ETA, still be denied at the border? Let's say they get their passport, book their flight, show up at the border, no ETA required ahead of time. Yes, of course, they could still be denied at the border, but ETAs, even people who are granted ETAs could still be denied at the border as well. Okay, it's one more roadblock, it's one more obstacle, basically, in order to get there. So speech is one. Okay, I think the easier criteria to deny on is going to be criminal violations. We're talking about 70 million plus Americans that estimated that have some sort of misdemeanor or felony record. Okay. If you're applying for an ETA in another country, that's going to require you to disclose any conviction you've had, or if eventually ETAs start demanding an FBI background check for Americans, okay, in order to apply, okay, that's a ton of Americans that are going to start, having to worry about whether they're going to be able to gain access, right? And I don't make the claim that all 77 million are going to be denied. I don't think it's the case. I don't even think a majority of them are going to be denied. But where previously Americans could just travel no problem, I mean, even if you had a criminal record, traveling to Europe has not been an issue. Now there's doubt. Now there's concern. Now there's less certainty to be able to go on that honeymoon in Europe, or even a sabbatical, or 2 month summer in Spain, or whatever, right? So I think the most easily identifiable ground and the easiest to exclude on without pushback politically, domestically, is criminal record, right? Everybody, who's against being tough on crime? Who's against not letting criminals, rapists, and murderers come visit our country, right? When it's phrased like that, not many people step up and say, yeah, well, this is a slippery slope to something that's more harmful. So we have the speech as the grounds of exclusion for ETAs. We have the criminal violations, and then of course we have previous travel, right? And again, unfortunately, the United States kind of leads the way on this. Okay, if you are a non-U.S. citizen, non-resident, and you're applying for ESTA, electronic travel authorization, to visit the United States visa-free. Okay, so if you're a citizen of one of the 42 countries, that is part of the ESTA program. But you've traveled to Cuba since 2011. If you've traveled to Iran since 2011, okay, well, you don't qualify for ESTA, unfortunately. Doesn't mean you're excluded necessarily from the United States. You're not automatically inadmissible, but you have to go online and fill out the big boy, the DS-160, okay, the B2 tourist visa application, not just the ESTA. You have to find the consulate that handles applications for your jurisdiction. You have to book an interview, okay, which could be weeks and months out. In some cases, it's over a year out, okay? And you have to show up for that visa interview, okay? And you have to get your little, 60 seconds at the window with the U.S. consular official, and you have to prove that you have non-immigrant intent. You're presumed to have immigrant intent. There's an operating presumption against you as a B2 tourist visa application, and it's up to you. It's your duty under the law to rebut the presumption. And you have to decide whether you're going to, well, you don't decide. The U.S. decides whether they're going to grant you a B2 tourist visa to come to the United States. Why? No criminal record. Let's say no speech, okay, online. No support for terrorist organization. But just because you took a vacation 10 years ago now, okay, 10 years ago is 2015, okay, 10 years ago in one of the countries that excludes you from the ESTA program, okay? So That's the U.S. The U.S. program is kind of more difficult, is tougher, I think, than probably most ETAs. Okay, but that's kind of the model. That's the model for excluding people on electronic travel authorizations based off of travel to other countries, right? Now, who's not excluded from the United States? Okay, based off of just travel to Iran. Okay, um, a U.S. citizen is not excluded to the United States based off of travel to Iran. Obviously, okay, as a U.S. citizen, they have access to come to the U.S. Legal permanent resident is not. Okay, a temporary resident, okay, a non-immigrant resident is not excluded, okay, from the United States based off of travel to Iran. A tourist visa holder, okay, a B2 tourist visa holder, okay, is not automatically excluded from the United States based off of travel to Iran or Cuba or one of these other countries, okay. So that vulnerability that I mentioned is unique to the ETA, okay, to ESTA. And that's part of the reason that I said earlier, comparatively, this shift from true visa-free access to Visa Lite comparatively increases the value of other mobility assets, right? In my opinion. And obviously we're generalizing here. Obviously the person's circumstance and the particular rules of the country's immigration law and the ETAs obviously control, but we're talking about trends here, okay? So yeah, the visa-free access that a citizenship provides to countries that are not that actual, country, so third countries, goes down relatively, but the other mobility assets, so citizenships in general, residencies, tourist visas, in my opinion, comparatively go up. Okay. Um, Another thing that I wanted to mention was we typically have a lot of listeners that are American. I think a majority of the Americans to these, a majority of listeners to these spaces are Americans. Um, FBI background checks here, in my opinion, are going to be more important moving forward for Americans that want to travel visa free, okay, or at all travel, as on tourist visas to foreign countries, especially Europe, okay. FBI background checks, and by that I'm talking about the identity history summaries, in addition to having arrest information, charge information, and conviction information, also often have immigration violation information, okay. ICE and CBP are CJAs, criminal justice agencies within the meaning of the FBI identity history summary, that report information to the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services, which is the entity that generates the FBI background check. So what does this mean? Okay, this means if you are somebody that has got to submit your FBI background check to a third country, okay, so let's just use some examples here. Let's say you're an El Salvadorian, okay, and you're applying 10 years from now, okay, for a visa, a residency, or a citizenship in a European country, and you have immigration violations in the United States, okay, you entered illegally, or you were detained by ICE, or something like that, and then eventually you lived in the United States, whether lawfully or unlawfully, okay. If you have to submit your FBI identity history summary from the United States as an El Salvadorian in order to apply for that mobility benefit in, let's call it, the European country, there's a good chance that FBI identity history summary is going to have a reflection. It's going to reflect those previous criminal violations that you had in the United States. Combine that fact with what we mentioned before, which is one of the main categories of information that's solicited, and we're seeing increasingly solicited by ETAs, is information about previous immigration violations, okay? So this has a domino effect, okay? A domino effect. This means if you commit an immigration violation in one country, okay, and then after that you want to live a long life, let's say you live another 50, 60 years after that, and you apply for a few more visas or a few more residencies or a few more citizenships during the pendency of your life, okay, if other countries are asking for and excluding on the basis of previous immigration violations to third countries, that initial slip up of the immigration violation in that other country can have the domino effect, okay, of decreasing your, let's call it, approvability in other countries. So what does that do? that makes avoiding immigration violations be higher stakes generally across the board. Okay, why? Because having an immigration violation might not, in a particular country, might not just spoil your access to that one country. It might have this domino effect, okay, of spoiling your access to other countries, especially as countries obviously, share information increasingly, right? So, obviously nobody aims to, I don't think most people aim to have an immigration violation. I think most people generally try to avoid it, right? But I think mentally we need to have a shift in our minds of what we think are going to be the consequences if you screw up and have an immigration violation. And by that, I mean, a visa overstay, breaking the rules of your visa. So, for example, coming in on a tourist visa and working unlawfully, okay, being detained, okay, by any immigration enforcement agency, and then obviously being deported, okay, from any country. All those I would consider to be under the umbrella of having an immigration violation. I think we need to have a mental shift from thinking, okay, yes, I understand that having that violation there could spoil my ability to, have access to that country or to live in that country or to, immigrate to that country. I mean, we need to shift from that to thinking that, oh, this might actually have a domino effect and even spoil my ability to access other countries unless I already have my foot in the door there as a citizen in that other country or as a resident in that other country, right? So that's the way I think about these things. As far as planning and strategizing, obviously people have different, people are coming from different citizenships and different profiles and have different priorities, obviously. But to me, what it says is to go for the most important benefits first. Okay, so don't putz around, don't putz around doing things in countries that could lead to a possible immigration violation that would have that informational domino effect down the line, before going for the mobility benefits that matter to you most, right? And then obviously, to the extent possible, locking them in by naturalizing, by becoming a citizen, right? Assuming, of course, that it makes sense for you based off of potential tax implications, based off of potential red flags of second citizenship, extraterritorial obligations, etc. That's a whole other conversation, and obviously highly technical and personal analysis. Okay, so we've been going for 49 minutes. As a reminder, our default time for these spaces is now an hour. I'm making an hour the default, and by that I mean we can expand beyond an hour if necessary, if we really have a bumping conversation. But otherwise, I'm going to end these at about an hour. So we still got David here. Still got Alex. We got Chris Lord. Anybody want to step up and give their thoughts on the slow death of visa-free travel? Does anybody disagree? Does anybody think that's a misnomer, the slow death of visa-free travel?
I wonder about the mental ways people are approaching this. Perhaps people here or just in general. Should people be thinking, well, I better go to all of these countries as soon as they announce an ESTA type program? Say you wanted to go to Japan and you see that it's going to implement the program in a few years. Well, now you go to that country before then. Or should people just start saying, do I really need access to 190 countries? Maybe I should just go to the ones that won't accept me. So I wonder what people's thoughts are, less on the legal side, but more on the mental side of how they approach this.
I definitely think people are thinking about, so to the extent that people are aware that this shift is happening, people are thinking about visiting the countries that they anticipate they might be excluded from in the future. And it's funny you should bring up the example of Japan, Alex. It's funny you should bring up the example of Japan, Alex, because I have a client actually who has a criminal record from when he was younger, and he loves Japan, loves Japanese culture, and he's very much concerned that he might be excluded in the future. And so he's making plans, in addition to getting post-conviction relief for his previous criminal record and cleaning up his FBI background check. He's making plans to try to visit Japan ASAP, in anticipation of more robust denial mechanism based off of his previous criminal record. So I think the first answer to your question, Alex, is most people are not really aware of this shift, right? Most people outside of the profession or people who are citizenship nerds, passport nerds, sovereignty enthusiasts. But once people are aware, yeah, I think people are doing exactly what you just mentioned. All right. We got
And what do
Nachos,
you
we got
think?
Chris. One moment, Alex. Just a reminder for all newcomers, anybody who wants to speak is welcome to speak. Just send me a request and I'll prove it right away. Go ahead, Alex.
What do you think about the idea of just saying that I'm not going to go to countries that make it hard? There's already more countries that one can go to than one can ever go to. So maybe it's time to just focus on the ones that are making it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people do that. I have other clients that I'm doing post-conviction relief for that are pursuing second citizenship via residency, the residency routes. And their attitude is well, I'm generalizing here. I'm thinking of a couple clients here, but this cadre, let's call it, of client is just thinking about where they think they have a path to residency and citizenship. That's those people have less country specific affinity and are more concerned with just getting the second or the third citizenship and having the freedom that comes from having less single sovereign reliance, irrespective of what those citizenships are, right? That constitute their second and third citizenship, right? So yeah, some people are more fixated on certain countries. They love those countries. Some people just want, the ability to access certain parts of the world, and they don't mind, kind of which residency or citizenship it goes to. They're more flexible, basically, based off of their previous history. All right. So, okay. So we've been going for 55, 54 minutes now. I think I'm going to wrap it up here unless anybody wants to step up and ask a question or make a comment or give their thoughts. So I'll start talking about basically the next mobility space and solicit some suggestions from people. If anybody thinks of a question, while I'm doing this, just step forward and go ahead, and we can continue if necessary. We got a few more minutes. But as a reminder, this is our 23rd mobility space. Okay. What should we talk about next? Okay. Alex brought up birthright citizenship / birth tourism. I have that queued up. We're going to have that as a topic. I probably don't want to have it for the next one yet, but maybe a few spaces in the future we'll have that. I'm interested in possibly doing a space on the FBI background check, especially for Americans that are pursuing residency and citizenship elsewhere. I'm a little bit fearful that might be too niche. Okay, I'd like to get your guys' opinion. And then, of course, we want to do a space for sure on consular assistance as a benefit of multiple citizenship. I love that topic. That's a topic that could fill more than one space. I've been dragging on making that a space yet because I kind of want to get either a professional in the extradition realm on or a previous consular official who can kind of speak and give some inside baseball about their experience, visiting citizens of their countries that have been detained abroad. So their experience is giving consular assistance. So I've kind of been dragging on pulling the trigger on that as a mobility space until I can kind of get somebody, professional to commit to that. What do you guys and girls think for the next mobility space? Does anybody have a topic or two that they feel they really want to talk about next?
The inability to renounce citizenship and the trade-offs that come with that.
Oh, that's a good one. And I saw you've been interested in Argentina, and you've been interested in relinquishment and renunciation of U.S. citizenship. I think I've seen your post here and there. That's a good topic. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So Alex and everybody else, I'm going to put up a poll asking what people want the next topic to be. Alex, I'm going to put that suggestion up as one of the options, and I'll give it just a little bit of an extra kind of weight because it was your suggestion. Okay, that's it. So this is our 23rd mobility space. We're doing 50 mobility spaces this year, 2025, on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, passports, freedom of movement, and general sovereignty. We typically do these Mondays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The rules are there's pretty much no rules. Everybody is welcome and anybody can speak. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining, including our anonymous listeners. Have a great week.